we are starting, we'll call session 2. Let me make sure it's got plenty of volume. I think it does. Speak loudly. I don't have to. My voice carries. Anyway, all right, so when we left off, we were talking about like the 1950s, 1960s, practicing law. I think this is the broadest question I'm going to ask, but as a professional musician in the 1950s, and then embarking on a career in the music industry, mostly as a lawyer for the next 70 years, how...
not 70 years, yeah.
69 years and 8 months. 9 months, because in January 1953.
That long?
Yeah, January 1953
Wow.
is when you received your license to practice. That's when you passed.
Yeah, but I didn't start practicing right away.
Fair enough, but
I
you
just
had a
started
law
practicing.
degree for 70 years.
I had a license. I had
Yeah,
my law
you had a
degree.
law degree and a
I had
license.
my law degree in 51.
And yeah, okay, so then you had your license to practice and starting in January 53.
No, I had a license to practice in 51 in Illinois.
Oh, okay. In California, let's be clear about that. In California.
53, but I didn't start practicing for several years.
So that means, okay, well, okay. So, in any case, so starting from earlier than 1953, in terms of practicing law, in terms of being a professional musician, and then going into...
Goodbye.
Yeah.
Why goodbye?
And then you were still playing music and you started practicing law, but you have been involved in the music industry in one capacity or another for 70 years. Is that fair to say?
Okay. Probably.
Okay. In that time frame, going from...
What?
Comments.
No comment. All right, so as having been involved in the music industry, how have you seen it change? What are the most significant changes that you've seen from 1953 to 2022?
Well, dramatic changes. Everything changed. You got in the early 50s, people were they were selling singles and LPs.
Was this though before 33s? This was the
LPs are 33s.
No, but when were they selling 78s?
78 started earlier. 78 started in the 40s, maybe the 30s.
Yeah, okay. So, but they had started selling LPs, 33s at this point in time.
Now they were already selling. LPs early 40s. I don't know about early 40s. They were selling LPs. Oh boy. That's easy to find out.
Okay, we'll find out. But we're talking about, in any case, just the significant changes over the last 70 years.
When I first started practicing, they were selling LPs. They were still selling 78s. They were still selling some 45s. They were selling 45s. So you had record stores where people went to buy. You had record stores where people went to buy records, whether it was an LP or whether it was a 78 or whether it was a 45. Of course, today the dominant method of acquiring music is through streaming. They're still selling. They're selling LPs again. They're sprung forth, and they're selling CDs, but it's down. But the dominant method of listening today seems to be streaming.
Well, okay, that's one change. I mean, you could go through the CDs and even the mini CDs, but cassette tapes, 8-track tapes.
The economics change, the contracts change, the royalty system changed, the audited methods changed, touring changed, the monies changed, the income coming in changed, the advertising, the exploitation, the promotion of music changed, everything changed.
So I didn't started to write them down, but too late. So, for example, how has touring changed? Touring? What was the experience of touring in the early 1950s versus?
Nobody played in gigantic venues. The biggest venues were the places that held 3,000 to 6,000 people, like. Radio City Music Hall was around in New York was around 6,000. The big place here was the Masonic Temple. Yeah, it was about 6,000 people. And then there were venues of 3,000 and 2,000 and things like that. People weren't playing stadiums, ballparks, and things like that.
When back in that day, though, when they did they tour more? I mean, did they perform more as like festivals? Like I always think of kind of, I don't know how realistic it was. I think it seemed very realistic to me, but like from Tom Hanks' movie, That Thing You Do, they had the Playtone Galaxy of Stars with all the different stars going to large venues. They looked like stadiums, but it was not just a headlining act. It was a whole series.
They weren't doing stadiums.
Well, not stadiums, but I mean, what were they doing?
They were doing
state
places
fairs?
like what's the one downtown? The Masonic. It was not the Masonic Temple, but it's owned by the Masons. The one by SC.
I don't go down anywhere near SC.
The one down by SC, which is it's a Masonic temple. I can't remember the name of it. They weren't playing coliseums. They were playing mostly indoor places. There'll be jazz festivals. There was the New Orleans Jazz Festival. I don't know, and there would be jazz festivals in Europe, and there was the Monterey Jazz Festival. And there was the one in New York. I forget the one in New York. There was a big one in New York.
But would you have a situation, using that as an example, like the Playtone Galaxy of Stars, they were all signed to a single label. I'm saying, I'm asking if this was how it went, like in the movie from the Tom Hanks movie, That Thing You Do, where they had the Playtone Galaxy of Stars, and it was effectively the label was called Playtone, and they had a number of artists signed to it. And would they take those artists, like a group of artists, and go play various shows, be it state fairs?
I don't think there was much of that. There was genre artists that would play. I mean, you had the theater in New York, the Apollo Theater, where a lot of the black acts played a lot. It's where Ella Fitzgerald got her start. You had bands going on tour. Of course, if you were black, you couldn't go on tour in the South. If you were with a white band, you had the blacks had to be in blacks, and the whites had to be in white bands.
Did you ever experience that when you were down in the South playing?
A little bit.
What was that experience
like? A little bit. Well, basically, you couldn't go in certain places, so we all went together wherever we were. I didn't experience it heavily, but it was well known. Everybody knew about it. There was a movie done about it called The Green Book, in which, in fact, one of my clients is doing a television show on the Green Book for musicians, which was, the Green Book is a list of places where blacks could stay.
I think there was a movie about that.
Yes,
not
and
that
now
long ago.
there's going to be a television show also on this thing. We're in Vegas, for instance, Sammy Davis couldn't stay where everybody else stayed. He had to stay in a different part of town.
So I know you never represented Sammy Davis Jr.
No.
Did you ever play with him at all?
No,
Did you ever? You said you got a call from him one time. Did you ever meet him?
no, I never got a call from him.
You mentioned getting a call from Sammy Davis to go see the Checkmates.
No, that's when I got a call. He wanted to get in to see the Checkmates.
So
I never met him.
So you never had saw him segregated and that type of thing?
No,
He
but
was a
I
big
heard
star
I
even
heard
then,
the
right?
story. It was Frank Sinatra who said, "This is not gonna. You can't do this."
He said you can't do what?
Keep Sammy Davis, make him come in the back door.
So how did that happen? Tell me that story.
Because in Vegas, Sammy Davis was friends with Sinatra. He worked with him. I forget what they were called, the Sammy Davis group. But there's a picture in the bathroom in there of the Rat Pack. He was part of the Rat Pack. And Sammy Davis was part of the Rat Pack, which was Dean Martin and Joey Bishop and Frank Sinatra and all that. And they used to play at the Sands Hotel. And because the Texas gamblers didn't want to see any blacks around, so the hotels would say, no, Sammy Davis or Harry Belafonte or Lena Horne, you can't come in the front door, you got to come in the back door. You can't stay in the hotel, you got to stay somewhere else. All that went on until people like Frank Sinatra said, not while I'm around here.
So basically, Frank Sinatra stood up for Sammy Davis Jr. and African American artists in general.
Yeah, Nat Cole had the same problem.
And so, what year? This was still early 50s.
All this was going on in the 50s.
And did this continue into the 60s, or was that starting to change?
Less and less toward the 60s. Although there's still heavy prejudice against blacks.
Going back to the concept of touring, people didn't used to play stadiums and stuff. What changed in the music industry that now these headlining acts? I mean, it's everyone, even from Guns N' Roses to even Taylor Swift.
Because the audience got bigger.
Because what?
The audience got bigger.
So what was? When you say the audience got bigger, are you talking about just because the population is greater, or just more people started consuming music?
The audience for music got bigger and bigger. Remember, you had the Thriller album, which Rod Temperton wrote Thriller, and Michael Jackson came along. That album's, I don't know how many.
7 number one singles on it.
Yeah, I think it's sold over 35 million albums, maybe 40 million albums.
I think it's the biggest selling of all time still.
Biggest selling of all time. And so people like Michael Jackson came along, were gigantic stars, and they started working bigger and bigger venues.
What was the first, superstar that you can recall, in music?
First superstar?
Yeah, I mean, because we talk about the origin of music, which I
I would say you had the big band era, which was the 30s and the 40s. And then moving into the 50s, Elvis Presley basically destroyed the big band era.
Okay, and then the Beatles shortly thereafter.
And the Beatles in the early 60s.
Did the
So
Beatles?
Elvis Presley was dominant in the 50s, and the Beatles were dominant in the 60s.
Now, we were watching a thing on Elvis. He never actually played outside of the United States, which was interesting.
You know why?
I don't know why.
Colonel Parker, his manager, had various issues overseas. I don't know what they were.
Yeah.
It's easy to find out, but he would not allow Elvis to go overseas.
Did you ever meet Colonel Parker?
I never met him, but I did the legal work for the comeback special of Elvis Presley.
So what work did you do? I mean, obviously legal work. But
I did all the legal work on the television shows for NBC. My client was Talent Associates, and they were the producers of that special.
And what year was that again? That comeback
I don't
special?
know, but you can look it up.
Was that in the 70s though?
Uh,
I think it was in the 70s, right? Like this is when
Possibly.
he became Vegas Elvis.
Possibly.
And okay, so what? I'm sorry, I missed it. What work you represented the TV show or the producers? Of the
I
TV show?
represented the production company that did that television show.
I'm going to come back to the music in a minute, but since we're on the subject, you represented back in the day other television shows, right?
Yes, I represented Get Smart, a television show called He and She, a television show called McMillan and Wife. They were all produced by Talent Associates, which is David Susskind, Leonard Stern, and Dan Melnick. They were the owners.
I'm trying to remember, just because I know your beautiful, lovely wife, who is seated to your left,
Right.
worked on the Carol Burnett show. Did you represent?
I did not.
Okay. But is that where you guys met?
We did not. We met before
Smothers
that.
Brothers?
Yeah, quite before
We
that.
met backstage.
We met backstage
At
at the Greek Theater.
At the Greek Theater. What show was that?
Nancy Wilson. I was representing Nancy Wilson, and Mr. Reese Richmond was joining the opening act called the Doodletown Pipers.
I remember the Doodletown Pipers. That's right.
So you're the one.
Huh? I am the one. So what year was that? Because I was what, like 4 years old.
1966.
66.
I was 3 years old. Okay. And
I can't believe it. You were 3 years old.
we're going to come back to that. But you represented the Smothers Brothers also, or not?
No.
Did you not the show?
No.
Oh, I thought.
Nothing to do with the show other than to allow them to hire my wife.
Any
Although
other?
she wasn't my wife at that time.
I know you represent The Voice today, the production company that does The Voice, right?
Yeah.
What other TV shows have you represented over the years?
Well, as I say, the Get Smart show, McMillan and Wife show, he and She, of course, Seinfeld show now I've represented for a long time. The Seinfeld show.
Do you represent the Seinfeld show or Jerry Seinfeld or both?
Jerry Seinfeld.
Okay. And you've had talking about Get Smart. I got to get back to music, but talking about Get Smart was is that how you met Mel Brooks?
No.
How did you meet Mel Brooks?
Actually, through Alan Schwartz. Alan Schwartz joined my firm, well, it was Cooper Epstein Hurwitz, and his longtime client was Mel Brooks. And then I started doing initially the music work for Mel Brooks.
What music work back in?
Well, Mel wrote all the songs for all the songs that were in his movies. And
like History of the World Part 1, I remember?
all that, and then he wrote all the music for the producers on Broadway.
Oh yeah, okay.
And Young Frankenstein on Broadway, and I represented him for that.
Well, when did you start? I want to get the time frame here. When did you start representing Mel Brooks?
I don't know. Sometime. I don't remember exactly.
Give me
When
a decade.
Alan joined my firm, I would say Alan joined my firm probably sometime early 80s is my guess.
Okay.
That's
so
a guess.
When you were a professional musician, you were basically, I guess you were not just doing music law. How did you get into representing a television production company?
Through music, actually, because I was representing a well-known producer, Bones Howe.
I know Bones. So what year was this?
It would be a guess. It's probably started in the late 60s, early 70s. I don't know.
Only because at some point I want to kind of put a timeline together of all this stuff. That's why I'm going to keep asking
So
you dates.
anyway, I started representing Bones Howe. Bones Howe
He was a music producer.
Yes, a major music producer. And he's an engineer and producer. And then he formed a company with Steve Binder. That's where I met Steve Binder. Steve Binder was a major television producer, director. Steve Binder then went into Talent Associates, and then I started representing Talent Associates.
How did you, because I know how you kind of, when you started representing David Rose, you convinced him you knew copyright and you went and learned about it. And you said that when you were sitting in court representing the various band members that were getting in trouble, you were reading record contracts, you were reading and publishing contracts. So you were reading television contracts also?
Yeah.
Was that just for education at that stage?
No, because they were being hired to do something for them.
So who was the first one that hired you to do television production?
I don't know. I can't remember which was the first one.
Okay. Come back to that. Going back to just the music industry overall. So we talked about touring. When you said earlier that the economy also is different now than it was in 1953, how is the music economy different?
Yeah, the numbers got bigger.
Well, aside from just the numbers getting bigger,
that was it.
How is it? That's it. That's the sole
the numbers
difference?
getting bigger and making the economics change in the industry. So if somebody is assigned to a contract, a record contract, and they're getting X amount of royalties, and they're getting or the royalties turn into X amount of dollars, and now all of a sudden they're selling millions of records instead of thousands of records. They go back and we go back and renegotiate the contract and get more numbers and all that. And then the LPs. Do remember that LPs were selling more than LPs were selling more than single discs, and then when CDs came in the 80s, it started selling. Same product started selling for $5 more than the LPs.
The disc was selling for $5 more than the
CD
vinyl.
We're selling for all of a sudden we're selling for about $5 more than vinyl, and so now the artists and the representatives say, "Wait a minute, we want a bigger piece of what is you're getting. We want a bigger piece of what you're receiving."
So I mean, today still a lot. There's discussion, use of the 360 deal. I know that's still a thing. That was not the case in the 1950s, right?
Well, with the exception of some of the labels like Motown.
So how did Motown do it?
Motown found these incredible people in Detroit and signed them overall for everything. They're touring, they're merchandising, they're songwriting, they're whatever, they're acting, everything. The Motown label, the Cap label, there were several labels out of Chicago. Cap was one of them, K-A-P-P. And they were doing 360s before the big companies were doing 360s.
It wasn't called 360s back then.
No, they weren't called. They were just called a slave contract. No, I don't know what the name was.
Did you represent any Motown artists?
I had an occasion. At one point, the answer is yes. Lionel Richie was a Motown artist.
But that came much
later.
Later. I mean, it also was after Motown's heyday, right? I mean, Motown's heyday was in the 60s, maybe?
Yeah.
And you represented Lionel Richie in the 80s, as I recall.
I can't remember exactly.
What was the thing that we